The scanner beeped 3 times and then went quiet. Rail Dorn looked down at the small device in his hand. The reading on its screen made no sense. He shook it once, the way a person shakes something when they do not believe what it is showing them. The reading did not change. There was something alive out there, deep in the trees, something that was generating heat and a biosignature unlike anything in his survey database. He had been walking since sunrise, and his boots were wet from crossing 2 shallow streams, and his back ached from the weight of his pack. The smart thing to do was to mark the coordinates and report back to the survey camp at the edge of the grid. Rail was not always smart about the right things. He pushed forward into the trees. The forest on Vareth was not like any forest he had walked through before. Back on Earth, forests had a certain kind of logic to them. Light came through the canopy in beams. Leaves made noise when wind touched them. Birds called from branches. Here, on this planet that the Coalition had been mapping for less than 3 years, the logic was different. The trees were enormous, wider than houses, with bark the color of dark red clay. Their roots rose out of the ground in tall arches before plunging back down, so that walking through the lower forest meant ducking and stepping and sometimes crawling through a maze of root walls. The canopy above was so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground, but it did not matter because the forest made its own light. Tiny spores drifted through the air like floating sparks. Patches of moss on the roots glowed a faint blue-green. Clusters of hanging vines pulsed with soft amber light in slow, rhythmic waves, like something breathing. It was beautiful. It was also, according to Coalition Survey Protocol, a restricted zone. Rail had been told, clearly and more than once, that the area past Survey Marker 7 was off-limits until a full ecological clearance had been filed. Commander Deva Oren had explained this to him on his first day on the ground. She had looked at him with her large compound eyes and used a tone that suggested she had given this speech before and had learned to make it very direct. He had nodded and agreed and meant it, mostly. But the scanner was showing him something that a full ecological clearance might take 6 months to produce. And in 6 months the reading might be gone, and he was already here, and his boots were already wet. He checked his comm. The signal from the orbital station was still there, faint but present. He kept walking. The trees grew closer together the deeper he went. The root arches became more frequent and taller. The bioluminescent moss spread across more of the ground, so that he was walking on a carpet of soft blue light. The air was warm and thick and smelled like rain on hot stone. Somewhere above him, something moved through the canopy with slow, heavy steps. He looked up, but could not see it through the layers of leaves and hanging growth. He noted it in his recorder without stopping. The scanner beeped again. He was close. He came to a place where 3 of the largest trees he had seen on Vareth grew in a rough triangle. Their root systems interlocked and tangled together into a single raised platform of wood and earth. In the center of that triangle, where the bases of the 3 trees met, the bark had grown outward and curved, forming a natural hollow. It was not a small hollow. It was wide enough for Rail to walk into upright with his arms spread. The inside of it was lined with something that was not bark and not moss. It was a woven material, layered in thick, dense coils, made from strips of bark and dried vine and a pale, fibrous substance he did not recognize. It looked deliberate. It looked like something had built it, carefully, over a long time. And inside it, resting in the center of the woven lining, were 3 eggs. They were large. Each one was roughly the size of a travel bag, ovoid and smooth, the color of pale blue stone. They sat in a shallow depression in the woven material, touching each other at their sides. They were not cold. Even from 2 meters away, Rail could feel a faint warmth coming from them, and the scanner in his hand was reading that warmth clearly. It was also reading something else. A vibration. A low, regular pulse, barely above the threshold of detection, coming from inside all 3 eggs at once. He stood very still. He did not touch them. He had not planned to touch them. He simply stood at the edge of the hollow and looked, and lifted his scanner, and began to record every reading it could give him. Then the scanner returned a species tag. The tag read, Varek. Below the name, in small text, were the words, status, extinct. Last confirmed sighting, 3,214 years prior. Rail stared at the screen for a long time. Then he crouched down, slowly, and sat on the root platform at the edge of the hollow, and kept scanning. He was so focused on the eggs that he did not hear them arrive. He became aware of them gradually, the way a person becomes aware of something they have been sensing for a while, without noticing. A smell, like wet earth and something sharper underneath. A sound, very faint, like careful feet on soft ground. He raised his eyes from the scanner. There were 6 of them at the edge of the trees. They stood low to the ground on 6 legs each, covered in gray fur that was thick and rough across the shoulders and thinner along their long sides. Their heads were wide and flat with large, dark eyes set far apart. Their ears were tall and mobile, turning slowly. They were built like wolves, if wolves had been made for a heavier world. They stood in a loose, curved line at the edge of the root platform, and they were looking at him. Not at the eggs. At him. Rill did not move. He kept his breathing slow. One of the gray creatures tilted its head, looking at him from a slightly different angle, as if checking something. Then it looked away from him, toward the hollow, and then it sat. Just sat, the way a dog sits, settled and still. The others, one by one, did the same. They arranged themselves in a rough curve around the base of the 3 trees, between rail and the open forest, and they went still. They did not growl. They did not show teeth. They simply sat, like animals that had arrived at a place they were supposed to be. Rail exhaled. His hand was completely steady, which surprised him a little. He opened his comm channel to the station. "Commander Orin," he said, his voice quiet and even. "I am past marker 7. I know. I need you to run a species confirmation on a biosignature I am uploading now, and I need you to do it before you tell me to come back." There was a pause. Then Deva Orin's voice came through, dry and flat. "Rail, you are in a restricted zone." "I know," he said. "Please run the confirmation." Another pause. Longer. He could hear the faint sounds of the station in the background. Then a different voice came on the channel. Lower, slower. A voice that sounded like someone who had just been handed news they were not ready for. "Rail." It was Breck Tanis, the cultural liaison, the one who knew the old texts of 6 different species and kept data on things that most survey teams never needed. "The confirmation is running. While it runs, where exactly are you standing?" "Next to a hollow," Rail said. 3 large trees. Woven nesting material inside. 3 eggs, large, pale blue, warm. Bio-pulse active in all 3. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Rail checked the connection. Then Breck spoke again. His voice was very careful, the way a person is careful when they are trying not to show how much something has shaken them. "Do not move," Breck said. "Do not leave. Not because of the eggs. Because of what is coming toward you. And Rail, whatever arrives, do not run." Rail looked at the 6 gray creatures sitting around him in the glowing forest. "Breck," he said. "Something already arrived." There was another silence. "Then you are already inside it," Breck said quietly. "The question is whether you understand what that means." Rail looked at the eggs. He looked at the creatures. He looked at the scanner in his hand, still reading Varek, extinct. He did not fully understand. But he stayed. Night on Vareth did not arrive all at once. It came in layers. First the upper canopy darkened, and the thin lines of real sunlight that had reached the forest floor during the day simply stopped. Then the middle layer of the forest shifted, the hanging vines pulling their petals closed, the broad flat leaves above curling slightly at the edges. Then the lowest level of the forest changed last, and the bioluminescence that had been a soft background glow during the day became something else entirely. The moss on the roots brightened. The floating spores thickened until the air looked like it was full of drifting embers. The amber light in the vine clusters deepened to orange and gold, and the whole forest floor became something between a dream and the inside of a lantern. Rail watched it happen from the edge of the root platform. He had not left. He had pulled a folded ground sheet from his pack and laid it flat on the root platform a few meters from the hollow entrance. He had eaten half a ration bar without tasting it. He had set his scanner on continuous record and propped it against his pack, pointing at the eggs, which were still warm, still pulsing, still sitting in their nest like 3 pale moons in a bed of woven bark. The 6 gray wolf-like creatures were still there. They had not moved much. One of them had shifted position once, walking a slow half-circle before settling again. The one nearest to Rail had, at some point during the last hour of daylight, lowered its head and gone to sleep. Rail watched its sides rise and fall. Wide shoulders, thick gray fur. He had written in his field notes, Drathan, pack behavior confirmed. Non-aggressive. Position consistent with perimeter guarding. The one closest to me appears to have decided I am not a threat. He had paused, then added, I am going to call it Greybrow because of the darker fur above its eyes. This is not scientific. I know. The comm channel to the station had been open the whole time. Breck Tanis had talked to him in short bursts, explaining things, and then going quiet while he checked references. Commander Oren had said very little, which Rael had learned meant she was thinking hard. The Varek, Breck said, sometime after full dark had settled, appears in the founding texts of 6 civilizations. Not 6 that we know of. 6 of the oldest recorded spacefaring cultures in Coalition history. The Thurvak, my people, have a full theological tradition built around its existence. So do the Lorith. So do for others. Every single tradition says the same thing about the nest. Rael was watching the tree line. What do they say? That the nest is a sacred convergence point. That when a Varek nest is active, the planet itself responds. That every guardian species on the planet will come. Guardian species, Rael repeated. Every apex predator native to Vareth. That is what the texts call them. The word in Old Thurvak translates roughly as those who hold the boundary between life and ending. The texts say they do not come because they are summoned. They come because something in them knows to come. The way animals on your planet know when a storm is coming. The way something deep and old in a living thing responds to something deeper and older. Rael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, How many species are we talking about? Breck took a breath. The Vareth Ecological Survey logged 11 apex predator species before the ground teams were pulled back for the restricted zone review. 11, Rael said. Yes. Rael looked at the Drathan around him. 6 animals. The trees beyond the root platform were very dark, and the spores drifted through the dark slowly, and somewhere in that darkness things were moving. He could hear them. Not loudly. Just the occasional crack of a root underweight. The slow rustle of something large pushing through undergrowth without hurrying. Breck, he said. Things are arriving. I know, Breck said. I can see your sensor logs. The first new arrival came from the north. It came slowly, which was the only reason Rael had time to prepare himself before it became fully visible. It was large, much larger than the Drathan. It moved on 4 limbs but had 2 more smaller limbs folded against its chest, making 6 in total. Its body was enormous, rounded with muscle, covered in fur that was deep black across the back and shoulders and faded to amber brown at the sides. Its head was broad and low, with small eyes that reflected the forest light like 2 gold coins. It stopped at the edge of the root platform and looked at the hollow. Then it walked around the hollow once, slowly, the way something walks when it is checking a thing from every angle. Then it sat. It sat to the north of the hollow, directly opposite the direction Rael was sitting, and it lowered its head and was still. The Goril. Rael had seen it in the survey files. Apex solitary predator. Mass approximately 400 kilograms. Not social. Not known to tolerate proximity to other predators. It was currently sitting 3 meters from the nearest Drathan, and neither of them was paying any attention to the other. Rael wrote in his notes, The ecological rules of this planet appear to be temporarily suspended. Over the next 2 hours, more came. He heard the Vesh before he saw them. A dry, papery sound from above, like large sails filling with wind. He looked up and saw 3 of them settling into the upper branches of the 3 great trees above the hollow. They were large, featherless, with wide membrane wings folded along their arms as they settled upside down into the branches, wrapping themselves around the wood with the ease of things born to hang. Their heads were smooth and eyeless. He knew from the survey files that they hunted by vibration, feeling the world through membranes in their skin. They did not look down. They simply arrived and became still. The Surath came without any sound at all. He only knew they were there when he turned his head and found 2 of them already curled at the base of the great tree to his left. They were long-bodied, with legs that seemed too long for their frames, and their dark fur carried faint lines of bioluminescence that shifted slowly from blue to green as they breathed. Their eyes were open, catching light. They did not look at him. Or rather, they had looked at him already, he realized. Before he had seen them, he had simply been assessed and filed away. By the time Rael's second ration bar was eaten, he had counted, carefully, 31 individual predators of 6 different species arranged in and around the root platform. They had sorted themselves without fighting, without any visible conflict. The Drathan had the east. The Goral held the north alone. The Vesh held the air above. The Surath took the base of the left tree. 2 species he had not yet identified held the west and south, and he was already writing descriptions of them in his notes. None of them were paying attention to each other. All of them were paying attention to the hollow. Rail sat in the middle of it all, on his ground sheet, with his scanner running and his comm open, and he felt something that he had not expected to feel. Not fear. He had moved past the fear quietly, somewhere in the second hour of darkness, without quite noticing when. What he felt now was something closer to responsibility. These animals had come to this place because something in them required it. They were doing something ancient and serious, and he was in the middle of it, and he had chosen to stay, and that meant he was part of it whether he had planned to be or not. Up on the station, Deva Oren was watching the sensor feeds with the careful expression of someone building a thought they have not yet finished. "Breck," she said, without looking up from the feeds. "Why has he not been driven off? He is in the center of what should be the most contested piece of ground on this planet right now. 11 apex predators competing for the same sacred site. He should be gone." Breck was quiet for a moment. "In the Thurvak texts," he said, choosing his words slowly, "there is a figure who appears in the oldest versions of the Varek story. A being from outside, not from Vareth, who arrives at the nest before the Guardians do, and who stays, and who is still there when the Guardians arrive." He paused. The text described this figure as the one who fills the gap the parent left. The temporary keeper. In the texts, the Guardians do not challenge the keeper, because the keeper is already inside the circle, already doing the work. Deva was quiet for a moment. "And what species is this figure in the texts?" "The texts do not specify," Breck said. "They only say, one who does not belong here, but stayed anyway." On the ground, Rail's comm crackled. He pressed it. "Still here," he said. "I know," Breck said. "How are you doing?" Rail looked at Greybrow, asleep nearby. He looked at the Goral's enormous still shape to the north. He looked at the pale blue eggs in the hollow, still pulsing, still warm. "I'm good," he said. "Tell me more about the Varek. Tell me everything you know." And Breck talked, and Rail listened, and the forest glowed around them, and the night went on. The drop in temperature woke him. Rail had not meant to sleep. He had been sitting with his back against a root, scanner in hand, comm line open, intending only to rest his eyes for a few minutes. But the night had been long, and the forest sound had settled into something steady and low, and at some point the boundary between listening and sleeping had dissolved without him noticing. He woke to a cold he could feel through his field jacket. The forest at night on Vareth ran around 22 degrees at ground level. Not cold by any dangerous measure, but the hollow behind him was colder than the forest. He could feel it now, the faint drop in air temperature coming from the direction of the eggs, like a door left open in winter. He turned and checked his scanner. The eggs were still showing life signs, still showing the faint pulse he had been tracking since he arrived. But the temperature reading inside the hollow had gone down by 4 degrees since his last check. He went very still, the way he went still when a problem was showing him something he needed to understand. He knew where the heat had come from, before. The parent Varek. A living body pressed against the eggs, holding the temperature stable through contact and warmth. He had seen this kind of brooding in reptile analogs before, though never on this scale. The eggs needed warmth. Not a great deal of it. Just enough. And without the parent, the hollow was slowly losing what it had stored. He checked the scanner again. 4 degrees drop over 8 hours. At that rate, the eggs had 2, maybe 3 days before the temperature fell outside the safe range. 3 days was a long time. But the coalition relief ship was 14 hours out. And after it arrived, there would be discussions. There would be a perimeter assessment. There would be protocol reviews. He knew how these things went. He had sat in enough of those meetings to know that between a ship arriving and actual action happening on the ground, time passed. A lot of it. He opened his comm quietly. "Breck, you awake?" "I do not sleep much," Breck said. His voice sounded the same as always. Rail sometimes thought Breck had removed the need for sleep through sheer application of worrying about things. "I saw the temperature drop in the sensor feed. What did the Varek parent use? Just body heat? Or something else?" "Body heat," primarily. Physical contact. The texts describe a posture, the parent folded around the eggs. Like a shell. The warmth was distributed through the whole clutch at once. How long did the parent maintain that? Continuously. Until hatching. Weeks. Maybe longer. Rail sat on his ground sheet in the cold air and thought about this. He was a xenobiologist, not an engineer. But his emergency pack had a thermal blanket, the kind that reflected body heat back at you with a reflective inner layer. He had a battery pack rated for 72 hours of low-draw operation. He had flexible heating elements in his cold weather kit, the type used for keeping instruments from failing in low-temperature survey environments. They were designed for equipment. They could be rigged. He thought it through step by step, the way his first field instructor had taught him. Not fast. Just one step, and then the next step, and do not skip any of them. He put the ration bar wrapper down and started going through his pack. Breck, watching the sensor feed, saw him moving and said nothing for a few minutes. Then, Rail, what are you doing? Improvising, Rail said. He worked in the dark at the edge of the hollow, using the bioluminescent moss as light, which was just enough and not much more. He rigged the thermal blanket in a wide, tent shape, anchored at the corners by root outgrowths, draped over the nest area without touching the eggs. He wired the heating elements to the battery pack with the careful, patient hands of someone who had repaired survey instruments in the field many times. He ran a line of elements along the inner surface of the blanket, facing down toward the eggs, and set the draw to low and steady. Not hot, just warm, enough to hold the temperature where it was. When he was done, he checked the scanner. The hollow temperature stabilized. Not recovering yet, but not dropping. He exhaled. Then he looked at the space inside the hollow. The eggs were large. The woven nest material curved up around them. There was a gap at the front where the parent had presumably entered and settled. It was just large enough for a person. He thought about this for a moment. Body heat. Physical presence. Not contact with the eggs directly. Just proximity. The blanket would handle the main thermal load. But there was a difference, the scanner was telling him, between the temperature distribution now and what it would be with a living body in the hollow. A body radiated heat in all directions. The blanket radiated from above. The sides of the eggs were still losing heat to the hollow walls. He thought about it for only a little longer than was strictly necessary. Then he crawled into the hollow. He moved carefully, keeping his body low and his hands away from the eggs. He settled into the space beside them, on his side, his back against the hollow wall, his front facing the eggs at a distance of about 30 centimeters. The woven material was surprisingly comfortable, firm, and warm. He pulled his pack in after him to block part of the entrance. The scanner showed the hollow temperature steadying across all sides. He lay there in the dark inside the hollow of a 3,000-year-old nest and listened to the forest breathe. Outside, everything changed. He could not see it from inside the hollow, but Breck could see it on the sensor feeds, and he watched it with his 4 eyes and said nothing for a long time. One by one, the predators shifted. The Drathan pack tightened its formation around the base of the 3 great trees, closing the gaps in their loose perimeter. The Goral, which had not moved in hours, rose from its sitting position, walked a slow half-circle, and pressed its back against the bark of the central tree. The Surath uncurled from their sleeping positions and moved to either side of the hollow entrance, lying flat, heads up, watching the forest. The Vesh in the canopy above the hollow spread their wings slightly, not flying, just opening, like hands cupped around something fragile. The whole arrangement tightened. Not around the eggs. Around the hollow. Around him. Breck sat back in his chair on the station and stared at the feeds for a long time. Deva Oren came to stand beside him. She looked at the feeds. She watched the sensor data showing Rail's life sign inside the hollow, steady and calm. She watched the predator positions, clustered and still. She said, carefully, "Are they doing what I think they are doing?" "Yes," Breck said. "They have included him." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Because he is inside the circle. Like the texts say." "Because he is doing the work," Breck said. "In the texts, the guardian species do not evaluate the keeper's intentions. They evaluate the keeper's actions." He went in. He stayed. He is keeping the eggs warm. In the language of what these animals understand, that is the same thing the parent did. And so he is being treated the same way. Deva Oren looked at the feeds for another long moment. Then she said something that Breck had never heard her say before in all the years they had worked together. "I hope the relief ship takes its time," she said quietly. A new arrival came just before dawn. It came from the south, and it came with noise, which was different from all the others. A heavy, rhythmic crash of movement through undergrowth, the crack of roots under a significant weight. The Tarik. Rail had read about them in the survey files. Crocodilian frame, 6 meters from snout to tail, with forelimbs strong enough to pull apart a tree trunk. An ambush predator, solitary, extremely territorial. It arrived at the edge of the route platform, and it was not calm. The Drathan pack rose instantly, every member on its feet, heads low. The Goral turned from the tree and faced the new arrival full-on, its smaller upper limbs spreading wide. The Surath at the hollow entrance rose into crouching positions. The whole clearing went taut. The Tarik stopped. It looked at the Drathan. It looked at the Goral. It looked at the Surath. It looked, last, at the hollow entrance, where the edge of a thermal blanket could be seen and where the sensor readings were showing a human being lying very still inside. Rail, inside the hollow, had heard it come. He lay still. His hand was on his stun baton, not raised, just resting on it. He breathed slowly. He did not come out. The Tarik stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. Then it turned, slowly, and it walked to the south side of the route platform, and it lay down, facing the tree line. The Drathan sat. The Goral turned back to the tree. The Surath settled. In the hollow, Rail slowly moved his hand away from the stun baton. He let the breath out he had been holding. He checked the scanner. Egg temperature steady. Pulse in all 3 eggs regular and strong. He noted the time in his recorder. He noted the new arrival and its position. He noted the behavior of the other predators during and after the confrontation. Then, very quietly, so that only his recorder would catch it, he said, "I think I am going to need more ration bars." Up on the station, Breck heard it through the open comm, and, for the first time in several hours, he laughed. The ship that entered Veritha's orbit was not a survey vessel. It was a coalition emergency response ship, broad and gray, with diplomatic markings along its hull that indicated it carried both authority and the people who liked to use it. Its arrival was logged by the orbital station at 14 hours and 6 minutes after Rail had first opened his comm channel and reported a Varek nest, which was 6 minutes later than Deva Oren had predicted, and she noted this without particular satisfaction because she was too focused on the conversation that followed. Admiral Sail Vor was not rude. She was Lorith, like Deva, tall and insectoid and 6-limbed, but where Deva had spent years on survey postings learning to read silence, Vor had spent years in diplomatic corridors learning to fill it. She had a clear, sharp way of speaking that suggested she had already decided on the correct answer to most problems and was simply waiting for other people to arrive at the same conclusion. She looked at the sensor feeds for approximately 90 seconds after Deva brought them up on the shared display. Then she said, "Extract him." Deva had expected this. "If we extract him." "I understand the thermal situation," Vor said. "We have specialists aboard. We can have equipment on the ground within 2 hours of landing clearance. The human's continued presence in the nest is not necessary from a biological standpoint." "From a biological standpoint," Deva said carefully, "perhaps not. But the predator arrangement on the ground is currently stable. 37 individuals of 7 species, no aggression, a functional perimeter. The moment we send a team into extract Rail, we are introducing unknown variables into that stability. The moment we leave a human being inside a sacred site belonging to 6 civilizations, we are introducing a political incident." Breck, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke. "With respect, Admiral, the political incident may already be unavoidable." He pulled up a secondary feed. "This is from the Open Xenobiology Network. I submitted the sensor data 8 hours ago for species confirmation assistance. The data included our live feeds." He let the number on the screen speak for itself. It was large. It was growing. 47 million views, he said. In 8 hours. 6 civilizations with Varek traditions. They are not seeing a political incident. They are seeing the texts. Vor looked at the number. Her expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, the way a calculation shifts when a variable turns out to be larger than expected. "What text?" Breck explained. He was patient about it. He had the patience of someone who had spent decades being the only person in a room who had read the original sources. When he finished, Burr was quiet for a moment. Then she opened a comm channel to the ground. "Mr. Dorn," she said. Rail's voice came back immediately. He sounded alert, which she had not expected after nearly 20 hours on the ground. "Yes, you must be the Admiral." "I am. I am going to need you to vacate the nest site and allow a specialist team to take over thermal management." There was a pause. Not a long one. "I appreciate that," Rail said. "I am going to stay." Vor's voice did not change temperature. "That is not a choice within your authority." "No," Rail agreed pleasantly. "But I am making it. The eggs are stable. The animals around me are stable. If I move, I don't know what changes. And I am not willing to risk the eggs on a theory about what might change. We can send a team to assess." "Admiral," Rail said, and his voice was still calm, still even, but something in it had changed. The way a door sounds different when it is firmly closed rather than just resting shut. "I have been here for 20 hours. I know what this clearing looks like. I know which of these animals is watching which direction. I know that the Goral on the north side has a wound on its right shoulder that needs attention, and I know that the Drathan nearest the hollow entrance woke up 3 hours ago and walked a perimeter and then came back and settled, which tells me it is not agitated by my presence. It is making sure nothing else is wrong. I know this place right now. A new team does not. And I am not going to leave the eggs while I am the only person with that knowledge." Another pause. This one longer. Vor said, "You are being formally noted as non-compliant with a direct order." "Understood," Rail said. "I accept that." Vor closed the channel. She looked at Deva. Deva looked at the sensor feeds. Neither of them said anything immediately. Then Breck's secondary display chimed. He looked at it. His expression, which was already unusual, became more so. "Admiral," he said, "we have incoming diplomatic contact. Multiple simultaneous channels. From," he read the list, "all 6 civilizations with Varric traditions. Incoming within the same 4-minute window." He did not think this was a coincidence. 47 million viewers, and those viewers included people who had the ability to make calls that went to ships like this one. Ver looked at the list. She was quiet for what felt, to the people watching her, like a very significant length of time. Then she said, "Do not send the extraction team." Deva nodded once. Ver looked at the feeds again, at the arrangement of predators around the hollow, at the life sign reading inside the hollow, steady and unhurried, at the temperature readings from the eggs, which were stable. She looked at all of it for a while in a way that was hard to read. "Get him more supplies," she said at last. "Food. Water. A proper heating unit if you can rig a drop without disturbing the perimeter." She paused. "And tell him." She stopped. "Tell him what?" Deva asked. Ver thought about it for a moment. "Tell him to keep good notes. Someone is going to want to read them." Down in the hollow, Rail received the supply drop at mid-afternoon. It was a small package, lowered on a thin cable from a drone that hovered above the canopy and paid out cable through a gap in the leaves with careful precision. The drone did not descend below the canopy. The package settled on the root platform outside the hollow entrance without disturbing anything. The Surath on either side of the entrance looked at it. One of them sniffed it briefly. Then they both looked away. The package had food, water, a proper compact heating unit with instructions, and a handwritten note in Deva's careful script. The note said, "You have been formally noted as non-compliant. You have also been formally noted as the only person on this planet keeping those eggs alive. Try to sleep." He ate. He swapped the improvised heating rig for the proper unit. He checked the eggs. He wrote notes. He watched the Goral on the north side, whose shoulder wound he had been looking at for hours, and he thought about it. And then he took his medical kit and he went, slowly, across the root platform, moving in a wide arc so as not to approach from a direction the Goral could not easily watch. The Goral tracked him the entire way. Its small golden eyes did not leave him. It did not move. It did not make a sound. Rail stopped 2 meters away and crouched down, making himself smaller. He put the medical kit on the root in front of him and opened it, keeping both hands visible, working slowly, the way he would with an injured animal back home. He found the antiseptic foam and the wide coverage dressing, and he held them up, not toward the Goral, just up, in the air, in the open. He waited. The Goral looked at the items in his hands. It looked at him. It looked at the hollow. It looked back at him. Then it lowered its head, turning slightly, so that the injured shoulder was angled toward him. Rail moved forward 1 careful meter and began to work. The wound was old, at least a few days. Something had torn the skin, deep but not into the muscle. It had been left untreated, because there was no one on this planet to treat it. The antiseptic foam was designed for human injuries, but the chemistry was neutral enough to be safe on most carbon-based tissue. He applied it. The Goral inhaled sharply through its nose, but did not move. He applied the dressing and pressed it flat. The Goral's skin twitched under his hands, the way a large animal twitches at a fly, but it was still. When he was done, he moved back. He closed his kit. He stood slowly. The Goral raised its head. It looked at him with its small gold eyes for a long moment. Then it turned its head back toward the north, toward the tree line it was watching, and it was still. Rail went back to the hollow. He picked up his recorder and noted the time and the treatment and the outcome. Then he added, at the end of the entry, "I don't know how to explain what just happened in terms that a standard field report would accept, so I am going to write it plainly. I asked for access. It gave me access. It knew what I was doing. I believe it understood what I was doing. I have run out of frameworks that can hold what this planet is showing me, so I am just going to keep recording and try not to impose frameworks on things that don't need them." He put the recorder down. Outside, the forest hummed in the afternoon heat. The spores drifted. The Drathan pack was asleep. The Vesh hung in the canopy, still and patient. The Goral sat in the north, its dressed shoulder catching a thin line of amber light through the leaves. Up on the station, 47 million viewers had become 62 million, and 6 diplomatic channels were all saying a version of the same thing. Do not interfere. And Rail, inside the hollow with the 3 warm eggs pulsing beside him, fell asleep with his recorder still in his hand. It started with sound. Not a crack, not a sudden sharp break the way he had always imagined it would be. It was a sound like a held note from a very deep instrument, a single tone that came from inside all 3 eggs at the same time, low enough that Rail felt it in his chest before he heard it with his ears. He had been lying on his side in the hollow with his recorder running and his eyes half closed, not quite asleep, not quite awake, doing the thing his body did after many hours of keeping itself still. The sound brought him fully awake in the way that something quiet can be louder than something loud if it is the right kind of quiet. He sat up carefully. He checked the time. Just past the 19th hour since he had crawled into the hollow. Just past the 33rd hour since he had first found the nest. The eggs had not changed in appearance. They were still pale blue, still smooth, still large. But the pulse that the scanner had been reading all along, the faint internal rhythm that he had been noting in his logs as biopulse, regular, all 3 eggs synchronized, had changed. It was faster now, not by a great deal, but the change was clear and the 3 eggs were still synchronized, all 3 of them running at the same new rate, the same new depth, like 3 hearts that had all decided to run faster together. He opened his comm Breck. "I see it," Breck said. He had said almost nothing for the last 4 hours, sitting at his station aboard the ship, which had now taken up a close orbit specifically to keep sensor resolution high. His voice now was quiet in a way that was different from tired quiet. "I see it." "How long?" Rail asked. In the text, the process is described in terms of the light cycle. "Dawn," the texts say. "The Varrock hatches with the first light." He paused. "Varitha's next dawn is approximately 2 hours from now." Rail sat cross-legged in the hollow, his back not quite touching the hollow wall, his knees not quite touching the nest, his hands resting open on his legs. He sat in a way that a person sits when they are trying to take up as little space as possible. He did not speak. He waited. Outside the hollow, everything had changed. He could feel it before he could see it. A quality of stillness different from the stillness of sleeping animals. A held breath, kind of quiet. He looked out through the hollow entrance at the slice of forest he could see from inside. The Surath on either side of the entrance were awake. They had been awake for a while, he realized. Both of them upright, heads forward, the bioluminescent lines in their fur running steady green, not the slow shifting blue to green of rest. Watching. He could hear the Drathan. Not their feet, they were too careful for that. But their breathing, which he had been listening to long enough to know the sound of, was different. Short and controlled. The way a pack breathes when they are alert and holding position. The forest had gone entirely silent. The bioluminescent spores still drifted, because they had no reason not to. But everything else that had been making noise, the small sounds of the ecosystem that layered under everything like a quiet river, had gone still, as if the planet were listening. The first egg moved. It was small, and it was internal. A shift, a change in the surface tension of the shell, barely visible, but the scanner caught it, and Rail's eyes caught the scanner reading, and he looked at the egg directly, and he could see it. The very faint movement beneath the surface. Something pressing outward, exploring the boundary of its own shell with whatever it had that could push. Rail stayed still. He had the instinct, which he recognized as an instinct and held at the edge of his mind without acting on it, to reach out, to help. He had seen enough field biology to know that helping was often the worst thing a person could do at this stage. The struggle of hatching built the animal. The push outward was not something to assist. He kept his hands on his knees, and he breathed carefully, and he watched. The first crack appeared 20 minutes later. A thin line, running from a point near the top of the egg down one side, following some invisible internal structure of the shell. The crack did not widen immediately. It just existed. Then a second line appeared, at an angle to the first. Then the two lines together formed a shape, and the shape moved, pushed from inside, and the shell opened. The sound it made was not loud. It was a wet, clean, particular sound. The head that appeared was large relative to the body that would follow it, the way infant heads are always large. It was translucent at the temples, so that the light inside the hollow caught the fine structure beneath the skin. Large reflective eyes, dark and wide, set forward on the face. A flat, broad snout with nostrils that flared immediately on contact with the air. Two small limbs folded against the chest, which would become wings. A tail that unfurled slowly as the hatchling pulled itself fully out of the shell and lay on the nest material, breathing. It was breathing. Rail's recorder was running. He knew it was running. He had nothing to add to it that it was not already capturing. He stayed still. The hatchling lay on the nest for a long time. Long enough that he began to worry, and then it raised its head, and the worry left. It was not weak. It was simply taking its time. It lifted its head and it looked around the hollow with its large, dark, reflective eyes, and it saw the nest walls, and it saw the heating unit, and it saw the pale shape of two more eggs beside it, and it saw Rail. It looked at Rail for what felt like a very long time. Rail did not look away. He kept his face still and his hands open, and he let the animal look at him. The hatchling pushed itself upright on its four limbs, unsteady but determined, and it crossed the distance between itself and Rail, 3 steps, slow and wide, like a thing still learning what its legs were for, and it climbed onto Rail's knee, and it sat there. Rail stopped breathing for approximately 4 seconds. Then he breathed again, slowly. He did not move his knee. He did not move his hands. He sat with a newborn Varek on his knee, and he looked at it, and it looked back at him with its wide dark eyes, and he thought about how he had not meant to end up here. Past Survey Marker 7, in a restricted zone, inside the nest of an extinct species, sitting still while something 3,000 years of history had decided not to come back from rested on him. He thought, this is the best day of my life. Outside, the second egg cracked. The process was slower for the second hatchling. It struggled more. It pushed twice and stopped and pushed again. Rail watched, and kept his hands still, and did not help. The first hatchling on his knee watched too, tilting its head at the sounds from its sibling's egg with an expression that was difficult to read, but was definitely an expression. When the second hatchling finally emerged, it was larger than the first, and it shook itself hard, once, scattering shell fragments across the nest, and then it lay flat and breathed deeply. The third egg, by the time the second hatchling had risen and begun to explore the edges of the nest, had already begun to crack on its own. Breck watched all of it from the station. He watched Deva watching it. He watched Admiral Vor standing at the back of the room, very still, arms folded, watching the feeds with an expression that she had clearly decided not to show to the room, but was showing anyway, because some things are too large to fully contain behind a professional face. Breck spoke softly into his recorder. All 3 Varek hatchlings viable, healthy, active, recorded and logged for the official archive. For the secondary record, he paused. The human in the hollow has not moved. A hatchling is sitting on his knee. He has not moved for 40 minutes. Deva glanced at him. Is he all right? His life signs are completely stable, Breck said. His heart rate is elevated slightly. His hands are absolutely still. He considered this for a moment. He is all right. He is better than all right. He is, I believe the Thurvak word is Garov. It means the feeling of being present at a thing that was not meant to be witnessed, and witnessing it anyway. Outside the hollow, the predators approached one by one. Not all at once. Not in a rush. One at a time, in an order that seemed to have been established without discussion. The Drathan nearest the hollow came first. It padded to the entrance, and it looked inside. It looked at the three hatchlings. It looked at Rail. Then it stepped back and sat at the entrance for a moment, and then it returned to its position in the perimeter. The Goral came next. It could not fit in the hollow. It stood at the entrance and lowered its great head so that its eyes were at the level of the hollow floor, and it looked inside. It looked at the hatchlings for a long time. Its dressed shoulder was visible in the entrance light. Then it raised its head and walked back to the north position. One by one, every species, every individual, each one came to the entrance and looked inside. Each one looked at the hatchlings. Each one looked also at Rail, and each one returned to its post. Rail sat through all of it without moving. When the last one had come and gone, he finally, gently, moved his knee, tilting it slowly until the hatchling on it stepped off and onto the nest material. It protested this briefly, then became interested in its siblings and forgot about him entirely. He picked up his recorder. He sat with it in his hand for a moment, thinking about what to say. Then he said, 3 hatchlings. All healthy. Predator acknowledgement behavior complete. Eggs documented. Hatching sequence documented. First behavior documented. He stopped. Swallowed. Continued. I have been in the field for 11 years. I have seen a lot of things. I want to note for the official record that I have not cried in a field log before today. I am noting it so it is accurate. That is all. He put the recorder down. Outside, Varitha's twin suns were rising through the canopy, amber and violet, the same as every morning on this planet, and also completely different, because this morning was not like the morning before it, and the morning before that one was gone now, and 3 things were alive in the forest that had not been alive before. And Rail Dorn sat in the hollow with them, steady and present, the same as he had been for 36 hours, and the light came in through the entrance, and it was warm. 3 days after the hatching, a proper research camp stood on the edge of the route platform. It had been assembled carefully by a team that had been briefed thoroughly on the sensitivity of the site, which meant they had spent a lot of time assembling it very quietly and with an awareness of where 39 predators were positioned at any given moment. The tents were light and their colors were neutral. The equipment was compact. The team moved slowly and in small numbers, and they did not make sudden gestures or loud noises. And after the first day, the Drathan pack had stopped watching them entirely and gone back to watching the tree line, which the team took, correctly, as a significant compliment. Rail had slept for 14 hours after the relief team came down. He had been escorted to a station medical bay, given food and fluids, and a bed, and his body had simply made the decision on its own to be unconscious for a substantial period of time. He had not argued. When he returned to the ground, the hatchlings had grown visibly. 3 days was apparently meaningful in Varek developmental time. They were larger, more coordinated, and significantly more confident about their territory, which they had expanded from the hollow itself to the entire route platform and parts of the surrounding forest floor. The Drathan pack treated them with a kind of careful, watchful distance. The Surath occasionally sat near them without interaction. The Goral ignored them entirely, which the relief team's xenobiologist said was probably the equivalent of approval. The debriefing happened on the ship. Rail sat across a table from Admiral Sail Vor in a room that was clean and organized and very much not a hollow in a forest, and he was aware of how different he felt in it. He had washed. He had eaten real food. He had slept. He still felt slightly like a different version of himself than the one who had been sitting in the forest for the last few days. Not a better version, just a different placement of the same person. Vor went through the protocol violations with the methodical care of someone who respected procedure even when they found it uncomfortable to apply. Off-limits zone entry without clearance. Failure to comply with an extraction order. Unsanctioned medical treatment of a native species. Extended occupation of an ecologically sensitive site without a field authorization form. Rail acknowledged each one as she read it. He did not apologize. He said, yes, understood. He said it calmly each time. When the list was done, Vor set it aside. She looked at him across the table. Do you regret any of it? She asked. He thought about it properly before he answered. He thought about the Drathan pack in the dark, the Goral's shoulder under his hands, the sound the eggs had made in his chest before he heard it with his ears, the hatchling on his knee. He thought about how all of it had been one continuous thread, and how pulling any single piece of it out would have changed what the rest became. No, he said. The eggs would have died. Brer looked at him for a moment. You don't know that. The temperature was dropping, he said. The relief team had equipment on the ship. But equipment on a ship is not equipment in a hollow. There was time in between. I was already there. He met her eyes. I made the right call with the information I had at the time. I would make it again. War was quiet. Then, you are being formally censured. Your field certification is under administrative review and will remain so for a period of no less than 60 days. Understood, Rail said. You are also being recommended for the Coalition Preservation Commendation, First Order, which is the highest recognition the Coalition awards for contributions to ecological preservation. She paused. I find the combination deeply irritating. Rail said, Thank you, Admiral. She dismissed him. He found Breck in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with his 4 eyes arranged in an expression that was the Thurvac equivalent of relief and amusement occupying the same space. Breck was not a tall person. He was stocky and gray-skinned and looked, to most species, like someone who spent too much time reading, which was accurate. Censured and commended in the same breath, Breck said. That is, statistically speaking, extremely rare. I will put it on my file, Rail said. They walked together toward the viewing area, where the ground feeds were displayed in real time. Breck talked as they walked, filling in the things that had happened in the wider galaxy, while Rail had been sitting in the forest. 6 civilizations had issued formal statements. None of the statements were identical. All of them said a version of the same thing, which was, this mattered, and we are grateful it happened the way it did, and we do not fully understand the humans' presence in it, but we accept it. The Thurvac Council issued a statement this morning, Breck said. They used the word Gareth in a formal diplomatic statement. That word has not appeared in formal Thurvac official communication in 400 years. You explained what it meant to me, Rail said. The feeling of being present at something not meant to be witnessed, and witnessing it anyway, Breck said. Yes, they used it to describe what the galaxy experienced. Watching you. He was quiet for a moment. Watching you sit still in a hollow for 36 hours and keep 3 eggs warm. It wasn't complicated, Rail said. No, Breck agreed. That is precisely what it was. The research camp on the ground was preparing for a shift change when Rail went back down. He walked the perimeter of the route platform in the late afternoon light, checking the positions of the animals the way he had trained himself to do over the last few days, reading their posture and direction and the small signals in how they held their bodies. The Goral was in its usual place. The Drathan pack was distributed across the east and north. The Vesh hung in the canopy above. The hatchlings were at the base of the great central tree, investigating a cluster of bioluminescent moss with the focused intensity of animals whose curiosity is currently larger than their coordination. One of them fell over while trying to inspect something, righted itself, and went back to inspecting. The other 2 did not acknowledge this. Rail watched for a few minutes, and then kept walking. Greybrow was at the edge of the route platform. The Drathan had been in roughly this position many times over the last 3 days, and Rail had developed a habit of noting its presence the way you note the presence of a landmark. When Greybrow was on the east side, the east approach was safe. This was not a rule he had been taught. It was something he had observed. He walked to the edge of the platform, toward the western approach, where his shuttle was parked in a small clearing 60 meters through the trees. His pack was on his back. His scanner was in his pocket. The relief team had everything they needed, and they knew the site, and the hatchlings were growing, and it was time. He passed Greybrow. The Drathan did not move. Its head turned, tracking him, the way its head always tracked anything that moved near it. Its dark eyes found him and held him. Rail stopped. He stood and looked at the animal for a moment. He thought about field protocols for departure from sensitive sites. He thought about the correct way for a xenobiologist to end an engagement with a native species in a way that was professionally appropriate and did not anthropomorphize the interaction. Then he nodded, just once, a small, deliberate dip of his head. Greybrow's tail moved. One slow sweep, left and right, close to the ground. The animal's eyes did not leave him. Rail turned and walked toward the shuttle. He did not look back, not because he did not want to, but because some endings are better when they are clean, and he had already been given more than he had any right to expect from this place. The shuttle was warm inside. He strapped in. The pilot, a young Lorith on her second ground posting, asked if he was ready. He said yes. She engaged the lift sequence, and the shuttle rose through the canopy gap and into the pale gold of Varith's late afternoon sky. Through the viewport, the forest spread in every direction. Enormous, dense, green and deep and lit from within, even in daylight, by the slow pulse of its own bioluminescence. From above, it was impossible to see the route platform or the hollow or any of the things that had happened there. The forest covered it all the way a forest covers things. Quietly, completely. Except that Rail knew it was there. And 39 animals knew it was there. And 3 young things that had not existed 4 days ago were in it, growing. And the planet was arranged around them the way it had always been arranged, and would continue to be. He pulled out his recorder and looked at it for a while. He thought about what he had written in the field, about running out of frameworks. He thought about what Breck had said about the texts. He thought about what Vor had said, that he should keep good notes. He opened the recorder. Closing field log for Varith survey. Restricted zone engagement. Duration, approximately 81 hours from initial entry to departure. Species confirmed. Varek, 3 hatchlings, viable and healthy. All original survey data has been transmitted to the research team and is in the archive. He paused. For the record, I went past marker 7 because a scanner showed me something I could not explain from where I was standing, and I have never been good at leaving unexplained things alone. What I found was a nest. What I found after that was a planet that had been waiting for something to come back, and had built itself around the waiting without knowing it, and was ready when it did. He stopped, started again. I did not save anything remarkable. I kept 3 eggs warm, and I stayed out of the way. What was remarkable was already there. In the nest. In the forest. In every animal that came to stand guard without being asked. I am a human. We show up in places we are not supposed to be, and we stay longer than is sensible, and sometimes that turns out to matter. I don't know if that makes us brave or just stubborn. Probably both. He stopped the recording. The shuttle broke through the upper atmosphere. Below him, Varith became a whole planet, green and swirled with white cloud. He looked at it as long as it was visible. Then the station filled the viewport, and the pilot began the docking sequence, and Rail Dorn put his recorder in his pocket and went on. He had more notes to write. He had a commendation and a censure to file. He had a field certification review to sit through. He had a report to write that would be read by a great many people who had not been in that hollow, who would need to understand, from words on a page, what it had been like. He was looking forward to trying to explain it, not because he thought he could, but because the trying was the part of the work he had always loved the most.